New York City's restless hum fades the moment one steps into the shadow of St. Patrick's Cathedral, where the rain-polished streets reflect fractured shards of stained glass light onto the wet pavement. The city outside moves with its usual urgency, but within the towering stone walls, the air is heavy with stillness, as if time itself has slowed to observe what is about to unfold. The annual Feast of the Sacred Heart draws hundreds tonight, the pews filling with believers who carry their own burdens quietly. At the far back, away from the swell of voices, Jonathan Roumie sits in a posture of prayer, his eyes closed, head bowed. For weeks now, a single vision has haunted his nights, a lone figure kneeling in a darkness so complete it seems to swallow hope, his voice breaking in desperate petition. And always, the same whisper following like a thread between heaven and earth: he needs to know I haven't forgotten him. He needs to know his sacrifice mattered. Jonathan has no doubt that tonight, in this cathedral, that man will stand before him. The air shifts as the great doors ease open again and a tall, gaunt figure slips in from the side. Even in the softened glow of candlelight, Jonathan recognizes him instantly. Jim Caviezel, the man who carried the image of Christ to the screen with such authenticity that it became his undoing in Hollywood, a role that had cost him his standing, his opportunities, and perhaps pieces of himself. It isn't only the thinness of his frame or the shadows etched beneath his eyes that Jonathan notices the weight he wears. The same burden Jonathan has been seeing in those visions. The ceremony begins, Latin hymns curling up toward the vaulted ceilings, mingling with the faint scent of incense. Father Rodriguez's voice carries a quiet authority as he speaks of the Savior's love reaching into the darkest places, transforming them into testimonies of hope. Jonathan's focus never wavers from Jim, whose stillness radiates a kind of locked-in agony. The pull in Jonathan's chest grows stronger, each note of the hymn pressing against the moment he's been avoiding all evening. By the final hymn, the cathedral is half empty, and the sound of departing footsteps echoes briefly before fading into silence. Jonathan rises slowly, each movement deliberate, his pulse matching the steady rhythm of his steps down the aisle. The closer he comes, the heavier the air feels, charged with something both sacred and dangerous. He stops just at the edge of the pew where Jim sits, head bowed, hands clasped so tightly his knuckles have whitened. "Are you Jim Caviezel?" Jonathan's voice is low, careful, almost hesitant. Jim lifts his head, meeting Jonathan's gaze, with eyes that hold equal measures of suspicion and exhaustion. "Yes." Jonathan extends his hand as though bridging an unseen gap. "I believe God has a message for you." For the briefest moment, something flickers in Jim's guarded curiosity that resists but does not retreat. The cathedral has gone still now, the few remaining worshippers lighting candles in faro alcoves, their movements barely audible. Jonathan slides into the pew beside him, close enough to feel the tension in Jim's frame. "For 3 weeks, he begins, I've been dreaming of a man kneeling in darkness. Tonight, I realized, it's you." Jim stiffens, a small intake of breath, betraying the hit. "What did you see?" His voice is tight-edged, with a weariness that sounds like it's been honed over years. Jonathan doesn't look away. "You've been asking if your sacrifice meant anything. Jesus told me to tell you, he hasn't forgotten you." The words land between them like a bell's toll in an empty space, clear, resonant, impossible to ignore. Jim's jaw works as if holding something back, and his eyes, glassy now, catch the light from the nearest candle. "How could you possibly know that?" he whispers, but it's not really a question meant for Jonathan. It's the voice of a man who's been speaking into silence for too long, only to hear an answer when he'd stopped expecting one. Jonathan's tone doesn't waver, each word measured as though he's laying down stones across a deep chasm. He speaks of the visions, in detail, the posture of the man in them, the silent agony, the sense that God's eyes never left him, even when the world did. Jim stays utterly still, his body tight, as though preparing for a rebuke he's heard 100 times before. But instead of judgment, what he hears is something softer, something that feels like water poured over scorched ground. The narration pulls backward, slipping into the corridors of Jim's memory, where the brightest lights were also the harshest. On the set of The Passion, each scene was more than acting, it was endurance. The lashes were real enough to leave raised bruises. For weeks, the cross was heavy enough to dislocate his shoulder during a take that still made the final cut. The cold seeped into his bones on long night shoots, and the whispered prayers between takes weren't for the cameras, they were for strength. And then, when the cameras stopped rolling, another kind of punishment began. Quiet whispers in studio offices, too Christian, too uncompromising, difficult to market. Meetings that had been on the calendar for months suddenly vanished. Scripts stopped arriving. The warm handshakes from producers turned into polite nods from across a room. It was a kind of erasure that didn't need to announce itself, it just closed the doors and kept them closed. In flashes, the story stitches together images of public moments, late-night hosts making him the punchline of jokes, journalists baiting him into awkward soundbites, colleagues offering empty smiles before turning their backs. The public had cheered for the role but turned away from the man who carried it. In the stillness of the cathedral, Jonathan's words thread into those wounds. He tells of another vision, not the pitch-dark kneeling figure this time, but the same man poised at the border of light, just one step from breaking free. Jesus said, "Your suffering was not wasted," Jonathan says, voice low but certain. He said, "Your greatest work is ahead of you." The shift in Jim's expression is almost imperceptible, but it's there a flicker of something beyond disbelief. "You're talking about the advocacy, the work with children." His voice is careful, as though afraid to give the thought shape. Jonathan nods once. "Exactly. That's what he's been preparing you for." The air between them changes, growing denser, like they've stepped into a conversation that existed long before either of them arrived. Jim exhales slowly, the sound of a man emptying himself of the last of his defenses. His voice drops, quieter now, almost conspiratorial. "I was going to tell him tonight that I'm done. No more speeches. No more interviews. No more fighting. Battles that no one seems to care about. I'm tired of standing alone." Jonathan listens without interruption, his gaze steady but not heavy. Then he leans forward slightly, the words leaving his mouth like they've been waiting for years. "To find this moment, you were never standing alone." The line doesn't fall between them, it roots. It hangs in the air, sinks into the worn wood of the pew, echoes softly in the vaulted silence. For the first time that night, Jim's posture loosens, the iron grip on his hands unclenching, as though that single truth has unknotted something he didn't even know was still bound. Weeks pass, the memory of that night in the pew lingering like the echo of a bell long after it has been struck. And when the call finally comes from Father Rodriguez, Jim does not hesitate. The gathering is set in the cathedral's adjoining hall, its high windows letting in the last burnished light of day. Rows of chairs fill quickly, faces from every corner of the arts. Actors who turn down roles rather than compromise. Musicians who lost labels for speaking truth. Painters whose work was quietly pulled from galleries. They come not for spectacle, but for the quiet understanding of what it costs to hold a line in a world that rewards bending. Jonathan stands at the podium first, his introduction brief and unadorned. "Tonight, you'll hear from a man whose faith was tested in the fire. He's still standing. That's all you need to know." Then he steps aside, letting the weight of unspoken anticipation settle over the room. Jim walks to the center without notes, without the polished performance of a press tour. There's no preamble, no nervous clearing of the throat, just a steady gaze sweeping over the crowd. It's a different man from the one hunched in the shadows weeks before. The stoop in his shoulders is gone, replaced by a quiet steadiness. "I used to think faithfulness was about outcomes," he begins, voice low but carrying, "that if I was obedient, God would open doors, multiply success, keep the world from turning cold." He pauses, letting the room lean closer. "Then I learned that faithfulness has nothing to do with applause, and everything to do with obedience." The words hang, neither rushed nor embellished. He tells his story plainly, not the tabloids version, not the half-truths of interviews, but the reality. The days on set when the physical pain bled into spiritual wrestling, the months after, when industry handshakes went cold, the invitations that stopped coming. How friends' eyes slid past him at events, as though acknowledging him carried a cost they weren't willing to pay. His tone carries no bitterness. It is the voice of a man who has stared at the void and decided to keep walking. As he speaks, there's a shift in the room. You can feel it in the silence, heavy, but not oppressive like the pause before a storm breaks. Then, mid-sentence, his gaze finds Jonathan near the back. Their eyes locking in a wordless acknowledgement of the night, everything began to turn. "When I thought God had forgotten me," Jim says, voice steady but deepened with emotion, "he sent someone to remind me. That reminder became my lifeline." The camera in our mind's eye moves across the audience, a young actress, biting her lip hard enough to hold back the tears threatening to betray her composure. An older musician, nodding with the slow rhythm of someone who has carried the same weight for decades. A stagehand in the corner, arms crossed in an instinctive guard, eyes wet despite himself. Jim lets the moment stretch, refusing to rush it, then delivers the line like a final strike. "If the cost of truth is your comfort, pay it. If the cost of light is your career, pay it. God always settles accounts in full." It is not shouted, not dramatized, it's simply set down like a truth, too solid to move. The room stays still. No one claps right away. The silence holds, stretching into something sacred, the kind that makes every person aware they've just witnessed a shift, however small, inside themselves. Then, slowly, almost reluctantly, the audience rises. Not in a burst of noise, but in a collective act of respect. It's not applause that fills the room, but reverence, an unspoken agreement that they've been reminded of something they already knew but had forgotten how to say out loud. Jim steps back from the microphone. Without bowing or waving, he simply nods once, the same nod Jonathan had given him weeks earlier in the cathedral's dim light, and returns to his seat. The weight of that night's gathering does not fade, it ripples. Within days, clips from Jim's speech begin appearing. online, first on small channels, then shared by accounts that once wouldn't have risked their reputations by posting his name. The video spread quietly but persistently, gathering millions of views, not for spectacle, but for the measured strength in his tone. The absence of bitterness, the presence of something unmistakably real. Comment sections fill with testimonies, people who had abandoned dreams, who had questioned their own sacrifices. Now, speaking of picking them back up again, old critics stay silent, their absence louder than any rebuttal, while former colleagues send cautious messages, testing the waters of reconnection. Some invitations are extended again, but Jim measures each one, accepting only those aligned with the purpose he's now unwilling to compromise. His advocacy work swells with momentum, drawing attention from unexpected places. Doors open that were never in Hollywood's gift to offer, and those who once dismissed him now lean forward. To listen, Jonathan moves through his own rhythm on the set of The Chosen, but something in him has shifted. The work is no longer just about portraying Christ on screen, it's about carrying that presence into every interaction. He prays daily for others in the industry, names coming to him in the quiet between scenes. He becomes more deliberate, watching for those moments when an unexpected conversation might be the appointment he was sent to keep. The pace of the story slows, trading the public stage for private vignettes. Jim walking down a rain-darkened street, stopping when he passes an old theater poster of The Passion. His reflection hovers over the image of the younger man he once was, and he studies it for a long moment before moving on. Another night, he scrolls through his phone at the kitchen table, long after the coffee has gone cold, reading messages from strangers' parents who found courage to fight for their children, young actors who refused to sell out, believers who held the line because his story reached them at the breaking point. In the solitude, he realizes the same God who had witnessed his years of obscurity was the one who brought him back to this place of clarity. Weeks later, he and Jonathan meet, again, slipping into the same back pew where it all began. The cathedral is mostly empty, the late afternoon rain tapping gently against the stained glass, blurring the city beyond into softened shapes of light and shadow. They sit without speaking for a while, letting the sound of the rain fill the space. At last, Jim breaks the silence, his voice quieter now, but carrying the weight of settled truth. "You were right," he says. "I was never standing alone." Jonathan turns, meeting his eyes with a small, knowing smile, and shakes his head. "No, Jim," he replies. "You were never forgotten." Outside, the clouds are breaking, and the cathedral's open doors spill a warm light onto the slick pavement, a gold path stretching toward the street. The narration lingers here, in that threshold between the sacred and the ordinary, where some calls have nothing to do with stages or spotlights, and everything to do with the voice that finds you in the shadows, saying softly, "I still see you."